The daily life of a slave on a plantation is complex. You have many responsibilities, but very few rights. Leg shackles were used mainly to keep slaves from escaping, and maybe even to transport the slave to the plantation. Slave badges were used as a sort of an identification tool to where the slave master owner could identify their slave. Also, that badge could tell of the specific task that the slave was to complete each. A slave anklet probably served the purpose of a chain. Wrist shackles, the older version of handcuffs, as I like to call them, served the same purpose as handcuffs. The wrist shackles kept the slaves from being able to use their hands in any sort of attempt to escape from the plantation. This chair was made by a slave. The slave or slaves who made this chair probably made it out of anything that they could possibly. Slave tokens were used to auction off slaves from their buyers to their sellers. Anti-slavery tokens were used as a sort of rebellion towards the people who were for slavery. Slave masters, owners, often kept inventory of what clothing they gave to each slave. If the slave were to lose these cloths that they were giving, there probably were consequences that they would. Slave cabins were not safe enough for slaves to live in. This particular cabin was one of few left standing after Hurricane Hugo in September of 1989. Slaves were not allowed to practice religion, but in secrecy. Slaves combined their community house and their library together to form a school and a church. If caught by their master for doing this, they could be severely punished. This is the old main house on Friendfield Plantation that the slave master owner and his family would live in. This is the main site at Mansfield Plantation where the slaves would typically be doing their work on the plantation. Slavery did not just have one specific variety. In this article, The Varieties of Slave Labor by David C. Littlefield already states my explanation. There are many different varieties of slave labor, which of course meant that there were more responsibilities and or maybe even not likely less responsibilities. Slaves did not have all the same things to do. They each had different tasks in which they were to complete or they were to face punishment. This article has many different excerpts that were obtained from different locations, from slaves working on sugar plantations, slaves repairing roads, a picture from the book From a Girl's Life in Virginia Before the War by Burwell, and another picture from The Great South by Edward King, and so on. This is a slave pen. Slaves would wait here for however long it would take for them to be sold or transported elsewhere. According to the article, Did Mandingo Fighting Really Happen? It states, there are few rules to the fight. Combatants couldn't use weapons, but could punch, kick, elbow, and knee. Fights continued even if one opponent fell to the ground. Fighting and headbutts were permitted. Mandingo fighting was common on the plantations. Harriet Tubman was to be considered in many places as Moses. Quoted from the Harriet Tubman biography. This was the first of many trips by Tubman, who earned the nickname Moses for her leadership. Tubman led many slaves to the north, slaves who were in search of their freedom. The narrative called Narrative of Henry Watson, a Fugitive Slave, just brings some information to light. It tells of what really happened when Watson was young, and it tells on his life of how he was born into slavery.
Stuff that God's going to handle my angels with. To kill me now. I said, you didn't hook me to death. I said, you ain't hooked salvation over me. You ain't even hooked grace over me. And I've been born to God. I said, no, kill me. I said, glory to God, kill me. He said, no, stop it. God didn't know what didn't know. That's why I kept my first faith. God didn't make that way, man.